I don't usually upload videos this long. In fact, I've never uploaded a video this long. So I want to explain a little bit. This is a collection of primary source articles related to flappers that I've already uploaded individually. But I re-recorded about half of them because in some of the older ones, I spoke about a mile a minute, and it was just sloppy overall. There are both longer articles from various publications and short articles I found at random in the New York Times. My hope is to provide a nice collection that can help anyone who is researching flappers or women in the 1920s. I can't say it's comprehensive necessarily, but I think it's a good primer. Or at the very least, it's a convenient package of content for people who are just interested in those topics. Oh, and I do plan on making more collections on different topics in the near future. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. A Flapper's Appeal to Parents by Ellen Wells Page. The Outlook, December 6th, 1922. If one judges by appearances, I suppose I am a flapper. I am within the age limit. I wear bobbed hair, the badge of flapperhood, and oh, what a comfort it is. I powder my nose. I wear fringed skirts and bright-colored sweaters and scarves and waists with Peter Pan collars and low-heeled finale hopper shoes. I adore to dance. I spend a large amount of time in automobiles. I attend hops and proms and ball games and crew races and other affairs at men's colleges. But nonetheless, some of the most thoroughbred super flappers might blush to claim sistership or even remote relationship with such as I. I don't use rouge or lipstick or pluck my eyebrows. I don't smoke, I've tried it and don't like it, or drink or tell peppy stories. I don't pet, and most unpardonable infringement of all the rules and regulations of flapperdom, I haven't a line. But then, there are many degrees of flapper. There is the semi-flapper, the super flapper. Each of these three main general divisions has its degrees of variation. I might possibly be placed somewhere in the middle of the first class. I think everyone realizes by this time that there has been a marked change in our much-discussed tactics. Jazz has been modified, and probably will continue to be until it has become obsolete. Petting is gradually growing out of fashion through being overworked. Yes, undoubtedly our hopeless condition is improving. But it was not for discussing these aspects of the case that I began this article. I want to beg all you parents and grandparents and friends and teachers and preachers, you who constitute the older generation, to overlook our shortcomings, at least for the present, and to appreciate our virtues. I wonder if it ever occurred to any of you that it required brains to become and remain a successful flapper. Indeed it does. It requires an enormous amount of cleverness and energy to keep going at the proper pace. It requires self-knowledge and self-analysis. We must know our capabilities and limitations. We must be constantly on the alert. Attainment of flapperhood is a big and serious undertaking. Brains, you repeat skeptically? Then why aren't they used to better advantage? That is exactly it. And do you know who is largely responsible for all this energies being spent in the wrong directions? You. You parents and grandparents and friends and teachers and preachers, all of you. The war, you cry, it is the effect of the war. And then you blame prohibition. Yes, yet it is you who set the example there. But this is my point. Instead of helping us work out our problems with constructive, sympathetic thinking and acting, you have muddled them for us more hopelessly with destructive public condemnation and denunciation. Think back to the time when you were struggling through the teens. Remember how spontaneous and deep were the joys, how serious and penetrating the sorrows. Most of us, under the present system of modern education, are further advanced and more thoroughly developed mentally, physically, and vocationally than were our parents at our age. We hold the infinite possibilities of the myriads of new inventions within our grasp. We have learned to take for granted conveniences and many luxuries which, not so many years ago, were as yet undreamed of. We are in touch with the whole universe. We have a tremendous problem on our hands. You must help us. Give us confidence, not distrust. Give us practical aid and advice, not criticism. Praise us when praise is merited. Be patient and understanding when we make mistakes. We are the younger generation. The war tore away our spiritual foundations and challenged our faith. We are struggling to regain our equilibrium. The times have made us older and more experienced than you were at our age. It must be so with each succeeding generation if it is to keep pace with the rapidly advancing and mighty tide of civilization. Help us to put our knowledge to the best advantage. Work with us. That is the way. Outlets for this surplus knowledge and energy must be opened. Give us a helping hand. Youth has many disillusionments. Spiritual forces begin to be felt. The emotions are frequently in a state of upheaval, struggling with one another for supremacy, and youth does not understand. There is no one to turn to, no one but the rest of youth, which is as perplexed and troubled with its problems as ourselves. Everywhere we read and hear the criticism and distrust of older people toward us. It forms an insurmountable barrier between us. How can we turn to them? In every person, there is a desire, an innate longing towards some special goal of achievement. Each of us has his place to fill. Each of us has his talent, be it ever so humble. And our hidden longing is usually for that for which nature equipped us. Anyone will do best and be happiest doing that which he really likes, and for which he is fitted. In this age of specialists, as it has been called, there is less excuse than ever for persons being shoved into niches in which they do not belong, and cannot be made to fit. The lives of such people are great tragedies. That is why it is up to you who have the supervision of us of less ripe experience to guide us sympathetically, and to help us find, encourage, and develop our special abilities and talents. Study us. Make us realize that you respect us as fellow human beings, that you have confidence in us, and above all, that you expect us to live up to the highest ideals and to the best that is in us. It must begin with individuals. Parents, study your children, talk to them more intimately, respect their right to a point of view. Be so understanding and sympathetic that they will turn to you naturally and trustfully with their glowing joys or with their heartaches and tragedies. Youth has many of the latter because youth takes itself so seriously. And so often the wounds go unconfessed, and instead of gradually healing, become more and more gnawing through suppression, until of necessity, relief is sought in some way which is not always for the best. Mothers, become acquainted with your children. Be the understanding, loving, happy comrade of your daughter. Become her ideal. And strive to live up to the ideal you set for the woman who is to become your son's wife. Be his chum. Be young with him. Oh, what a powerful and wonderful influence you are capable of exerting if you only will. Fathers, find out what is within the minds and hearts and souls of your children. There is a wonderful, an interesting, and a sacred treasure house there if you will take the time and pains to explore. The key is yours in return for patient understanding, sympathetic encouragement, and kindly wisdom. Make love to your daughter if necessary. Make her realize the depth of your love, and make her feel that you have confidence in her ability to live up to your standards of upright womanhood. Be your son's best pal. Make his interests your interests. Encourage him to formulate a workable philosophy of life. And remember this, a little merited praise means so much. A little encouragement goes such a long way. Oh, parents, parents everywhere, point out to us the ideals of truly glorious and upright living. Believe in us that we may learn to believe in ourselves, in humanity, in God. Be the living examples of your teachings, that you may inspire us with hope and courage, understanding and truth, love and faith. Remember that we are the parents of the future. Help us to be worthy of the sacred trust that will be ours. Make your lives such an inspiration to us that we in our turn will strive to become an inspiration to our children and to the ages. Is it too much to ask? Flapper Jane by Bruce Bliven. The New Republic, September 9th, 1925. Jane's a flapper. That is a quaint, old-fashioned term, but I hope you remember its meaning. As you can tell by her appellation, Jane is 19. If she were 29, she would be Dorothy, 39, Doris, 49, Elaine, 59, Jane again, and so on around. This Jane, being 19, is a flapper, though she urgently denies that she is a member of the younger generation. The younger generation, she will tell you, is aged 15 to 17, and she professes to be decidedly shocked at the things they do and say. That is a fact which would interest her minister, if he knew it. Poor man, he knows so little. For he regards Jane as a perfectly horrible example of wild youth. Paint, cigarettes, cocktails, petting parties, ugh. Yet, if the younger generation shocks her as she says, query, how wild is Jane? Before we come to this exciting question, let us take a look at the young person as she strolls across the lawn of her parents' suburban home, having just put the car away after driving 60 miles in 2 hours. She is, for one thing, a very pretty girl. Beauty is the fashion in 1925. She is, frankly, heavily made up, not to imitate nature, but for an altogether artificial effect. Pallor mortis, poisonously scarlet lips, richly ringed eyes, the latter looking not so much debauched, which is the intention, as diabetic. Her walk duplicates the swagger supposed by innocent America to go with the female half of a Paris Apache dance. And there are, finally, her clothes. These were estimated the other day by some statistician to weigh 2 pounds. Probably a libel. I doubt they come within half a pound of such bulk. Jane isn't wearing much this summer. If you'd like to know exactly, it is 1 dress, 1 step-in, 2 stockings, 2 shoes. A step-in, if you are 99 44/100% ignorant, is underwear. 1 piece, light, exceedingly brief, but roomy. Her dress, as you can't possibly help knowing if you have even one good eye and get around at all outside the old people's home, is also brief. It is cut low where it might be high, and vice versa. The skirt comes just an inch below her knee, overlapping by a faint fraction her rolled and twisted stockings. The idea is that when she walks in a bit of a breeze, you shall now and then observe the knee, which is not rouged, that's just newspaper talk, but always in an accidental Venus surprised at the bath sort of way. This is a bit of coyness which hardly fits in with Jane's general character. Jane's haircut is also abbreviated. She wears, of course, the very newest thing in bobs, even closer than last year's shingle. It leaves her just about no hair at all in the back, and 20% more than that in the front. About as much as is being worn this season by a cellist, male, less than a pianist, and much, much less than a violinist. Because of this new style, one can confirm a rumor heard last year. Jane has ears. The corset is as dead as the dodo's grandfather. No feeble publicity pipings by the manufacturers or calling it a clasp around will enable it, as Jane says, to do a Lazarus. The petticoat is even more defunct. Not even a snicker can be raised by telling Jane that once the nation was shattered to its foundations by the shadow skirt. The brassiere has been abandoned since 1924. While stockings are usually worn, they are not a sine qua nothing doing. In hot weather, Jane reserves the right to discard them, just as all the chorus girls did in 1923. As stockings are only a frantic, successful attempt to duplicate the color and texture of Jane's own sunburned slim legs, few but expert boulevardiers can tell the difference. These which I have described are Jane's clothes, but they are not merely a flapper uniform. They are the style, summer of 1925, Eastern Seaboard. These things and none other are being worn by all of Jane's sisters and her cousins and her aunts. They are being worn by ladies who are 3 times Jane's age and look 10 years older, by those twice her age who look 100 years older. Their use is so universal that in our larger cities, the baggage transfer companies, one and all, declare they are being forced into bankruptcy. Ladies who used to go away for the summer with 6 trunks can now pack 20 dainty costumes in a bag. Not since 1820 has feminine apparel been so frankly abbreviated as at present, and never on this side of the Atlantic until you go back to the little summer frocks of Pocahontas. This year's styles have gone quite a long step toward genuine nudity. Nor is this merely the sensible half of the population dressing as everyone ought to in hot weather. Last winter's styles weren't so dissimilar, except that they were covered up by fur coats and you got the full effect only indoors. Next year's styles, from all one hears, will be, as they already are on the continent, even more so. Our great mentor has failed us. You will see none of the really up-to-date styles in the movies. For old-fashioned, conservative, and dowdy dressing, go and watch the latest production featuring Bibi, Gloria, or Pola. Under vigilant Father Hayes, the ensilvered screen daren't reveal a costume equal to scores on Fifth Avenue, Broadway, or Wall Street. Wall Street, by the way, is the one spot in which the nude nakedness seems most appropriate. Where men's simple passions have the lowest boiling point. Where the lust for possession is most frankly, brazenly revealed, and indeed dominates the whole diurnal round. In such a place, there is a high appropriateness in the fact that the priestesses in the Temple of Mammon, though their service be no more than file clerk or stenographer, should be thus Dionysiac in appareling themselves for their daily tasks. Where will it all end, do you ask, thumbing the page ahead in an effort to know the worst? Apologetically, I reply that no one can say where it will end. Nudity has been the custom of many countries and over long periods of time. No one who has read history can be very firm in saying that it can never happen again. We may of course mutter in feeble tones of hope that our climate is not propitious. Few anymore are so naive as not to realize that there are fashions and morals, and that these have a limitless capacity for modification. Costume, of course, is immoral. You can get a rough measure of our movement if you look at the history of the theater and see how the tide mark of tolerance has risen. For instance, 1904, performance of Mrs. Warren's Profession is halted by police. 1919, Mrs. Warren OK. Town roused to frenzy by Aphrodite, in which one chorus girl is exposed for 1 minute in dim light and a union suit. 1923, Union suit OK. Self-appointed censors have conniption fits over chorus girls naked from the waist up. 1925, nudity from waist up taken for granted. Excitement caused by show in which girls wear only fig leaves. Plotting the curve of tolerance and projecting it into the future, it is thus easy to see that complete nudity in the theater will be reached on March 12, 1927. Just what will the appalling consequences be? Perhaps about what they have been in the theaters of several European capitals, where such displays have long been familiar. Those who are interested in that sort of thing will go, others will abstain. At this point, Billy Sunday, discussing this theme, would certainly drop into anecdotage. Were we to do the same, we might see Jane on the sun porch, talking to a mixed group of her mother's weekend guests. "Jane," says one, "I hear you cut yourself in bathing." "I'll say I did," comes crisply back. "Look." She lifts her skirt 3 or 4 inches, revealing both brown knees, and above one of them a half-healed deep scratch. Proper murmurs of sympathy. From one quarter, a chilling silence which draws our attention to the empurpled countenance of a lady guest in the throes of what Eddie Cantor calls the sex complex. Jane's knees have thrown her all a-twitter. And mistaking the character of her emotion, she thinks it is justified indignation. She is glad to display it openly for the reproof thereby administered. "Well, damn it," says Jane in a subsequent private moment. "Anybody who can't take a knee or two nowadays might as well quit. And besides, she goes to the beaches and never turns a hair." Here is a real point. The recent history of the Great Disrobing movement can be checked up in another way by looking at the bathing costumes which have been accepted without question at successive intervals. There are still a few beaches near New York City which insist on more clothes than anyone can safely swim in, and thereby help to drown several young women each year. But in most places, universally in the West, a girl is now compelled to wear no more than is a man. The empurpled one, to be consistent, ought to have apoplexy every time she goes to the shore, but as Jane observes, she doesn't. "Jane," says I am a reporter representing American inquisitiveness. Why do all of you dress the way you do?" "I don't know," says Jane. This reply means nothing. It is just the device by which the younger generation gains time to think. Almost at once, she adds, "The old girls are doing it because youth is. Everybody wants to be young now, though they want all us young people to be something else. Funny, isn't it?" "In a way," says Jane, "it's just honesty. Women have come down off the pedestal lately. They are tired of this mysterious feminine charm stuff. Maybe it goes with independence, earning your own living, and voting and all that. There was always a bit of the harem in that cover up your arms and legs business, don't you think? Women still want to be loved," goes on Jane, warming to her theme, "but they want it on a 50-50 basis, which includes being admired for the qualities they really possess. Dragging in this strange allurement stuff doesn't seem sporting. It's like cheating in games or lying. Ask me, did the war start all this?" says Jane helpfully. The answer is, how do I know? How does anybody know? I read this book, What'd'ya-call-it, by Rose Macaulay, and she showed where they'd been excited about wild youth for 3 generations anyhow, since 1870. I have a hunch maybe they've always been excited. Somebody wrote in a magazine how the war had upset the balance of the sexes in Europe, and the girls over there were wearing the new styles as part of the competition for husbands. Sounds like the bunk to me. If you wanted to nail a man for life, I think you'd do better to go in for the old-fashioned line, "March me to the altar, esteemed sir, before you learn whether I have limbs or not." Of course, not so many girls are looking for a life meal ticket nowadays. Lots of them prefer to earn their own living and omit the Home and Baby Act. Well, anyhow, postpone it years and years. They think a bachelor girl can and should do everything a bachelor man does. "It's funny," says Jane, "that just when women's clothes are getting scanty, men's should be going the other way. Look at the Oxford trousers, as though a man had been caught by the ankles in a flannel quicksand. Do the morals go with the clothes, or the clothes with the morals? Or are they independent? These are questions I have not ventured to put to Jane, knowing that her answer would be, "So's your old man." Generally speaking, however, it is safe to say that as regards the wildness of youth, there is a good deal more smoke than fire. Anyhow, the new era of undressing, as already suggested, has spread far beyond the boundaries of Jane's group. The fashion is followed by hordes of unquestionably monogamous matrons, including many who join heartily in the general ululations as to what young people are coming to. Attempts to link the new freedom with prohibition, with the automobile, the decline of fundamentalism, are certainly without foundation. These may be accessory, and indeed almost certainly are, but only after the fact. That fact is, as Jane says, that women today are shaking off the shreds and patches of their age-old servitude. Feminism has won a victory so nearly complete that we have even forgotten the fierce challenge which once inhered in the very word. Women have highly resolved that they are just as good as men, and intend to be treated so. They don't mean to have any more unwanted children. They don't intend to be debarred from any profession or occupation which they choose to enter. They clearly mean, even though not all of them yet realize it, that in the great game of sexual selection, they shall no longer be forced to play the role, simulated or real, of helpless quarry. If they want to wear their heads shaven as a symbol of defiance against the former fate which for 3 millennia forced them to dress their heavy locks according to male decrees, they will have their way. If they should elect to go naked, nothing is more certain than that naked they will go, while from the sidelines to which he has been relegated, mere man is vouchsafed permission only to pipe a feeble hurrah, hurrah. Flapper Americana Novissima by G. Stanley Hall. The Atlantic Monthly, June 1922. When years ago I first heard the picturesque word flapper applied to a girl, I thought of a loose sail flapping in whatever wind may blow, and liable to upset the craft it is meant to impel. There was also in my mind the flitting and yet cruder mental imagery of a wash just hung out to dry in the light and breeze before it is starched and ironed for use. I was a little ashamed of this when the dictionary set me right by defining the word as a fledgling, yet in the nest, and vainly attempting to fly while its wings have only pin feathers. And I recognized that thus the genius of slanguage had made the squab the symbol of budding girlhood. This too had the advantage of a moral, implying what would happen if the young bird really ventured to trust itself to its pinions prematurely. The other day, I found myself walking a few rods behind a girl who must have been approaching Sweet 16. She held to the middle of the broad sidewalk. It was just after 4, and she was apparently on her way home from high school. We were on a long block that passed a college campus, where the students were foregathering for afternoon sports. She was not chewing gum, but was occasionally bringing some tidbit from her pocket to her mouth, taking in everything in sight, and her gait was swagger and superior. "Howdy, Billy," she called to a youth whom I fancied a classmate, and "Hello, boys," was her greeting to 3 more a little later. Soon she turned on her heel and wandered back, so that I had to meet her. A glance at her comely, happy, innocent, and vividly tinted face as I swerved to one side that she might keep the middle of the walk almost made me feel that it would not surprise her overmuch if I stepped to the very edge of the gutter and removed my hat, as if apologizing for trespassing on preserves that belonged to her. Had I done so, however, it might have made no difference, for I suspect that she would have remained unconscious of my very existence, although just then we were almost the only ones on the block. If I had been 20 and attractive, she would have been able to describe me to a nicety without for an instant having me in the direct focus of her vision. For we must never forget that at this very peculiar age, nature gives to the other sex quite as great sensitiveness of indirect as of direct vision, so that they know fully as much of what falls on the periphery of their retina as of what strikes their fovea, if not sometimes more. I now felt at liberty to look at her a little more carefully. She wore a knitted hat, with hardly any brim, of a flame or bonfire hue, a henna scarf, 2 strings of Betty beads of different colors twisted together, an open short coat with ample pockets, a skirt with vertical stripes so pleated that at the waist it seemed very dark, but the alternative stripes of white showed progressively downward, so that, as she walked, it gave something of what physiological psychologists call a flicker effect. On her right wrist were several bangles. On her left, of course, a wristwatch. Her shoes were Oxfords, with a low, broad heel. Her stockings were woolen and of brilliant hue. But most noticeable of all were her high overshoes, or galoshes. One seemed to be turned down at the top and entirely unbuckled, while the other was fastened below and flapped about her trim ankle in a way that compelled attention. This was in January 1922, as should be particularly noted because by the time this screed meets the reader's eye, flapperdom, to be really chic and up-to-date, will be quite different in some of these details. She was out to see the world, and incidentally, to be seen of it. And as I lingered at the campus block to see the students frolic, she passed me 3 times, still on her devious way home, I presume, from school. Sheer accident had brought me within the range of the very specimen I sought, and perhaps a rare and extreme type, therefore all the more interesting. But a deep instinct told me that I could never by any possible means hope to get into any kind of personal rapport with her, or even with her like. I might have been her grandfather, and in all the world of man there is no wider and more unbridgeable gulf than that which yawns between me and those of my granddaughter's age. If I should try to cultivate her, she would draw back into her shell, and to cultivate me would be the very last of all her desires. Hence, as was only fair to her, I turned to a third source of information about her, namely her teachers. They told me a large notebook full, far more than I can, and alas, some that I would not, repeat, so that it is puzzling to know what to omit, or even where to begin, in the tangle of incidents, traits, and judgments. Let us start at random with dancing, on which the flapper dotes as probably never before, in all the history of the terpsichorean art, made up of crazes as it has been, has anyone begun to do. A good dance is as near heaven as the flapper can get and live. She dances at noon, and at recess in the school gymnasium, and if not in the school, at the restaurants between courses, or in the recreation and restrooms in factories and stores. She knows all the latest variations of the perennial foxtrot, the ungainly contortions of the camel walk, yields with abandon to the fascination of the tango, and if the floor is crowded, there is always room for the languorous and infantile toddle. And the cheek-to-cheek close formation, which one writer ascribes to the high cost of rent nowadays, which necessitates the maximum of motion in the minimum of space, has a lure of its own, for partners must sometimes cling together in order to move at all. Verticality of motion and, at least, the vibrations of the shimmy are always possible. High school girls told my informant that they park their corsets when they go to dances, because they have been taught by their instructors in hygiene and physiology that to wear them is unfavorable to deep breathing, and that this is as necessary for freedom of motion as the gymnastic costume or the bath suit at the seaside. And also that, to get the best out of the exercises of the ballroom, they must not be too much or too heavily clad to be able to keep cool. To her intimates, she may confess that she dispenses with corsets, a growing fashion which manufacturers of these articles already regard with alarm, lest she be dubbed Ironsides or left a wallflower. Alas for the popularity of teachers who would limit any of these innovations, however much they may be supported by anxious and bewildered mothers, who know only the old-fashioned steps. Despite the decline of the ballet, theatrical managers who advertise for corps of stage dancers report that they are overwhelmed by crowds of applicants. The flapper, too, has developed very decided musical tastes. If she more rarely takes lessons of any kind, she has many choice discs for the phonograph, and has a humming acquaintance with the most popular ditties. And if she rarely indulges in the cakewalk, she has a keen sense of ragtime and syncopation to the 30-second note. And her nerves are uniquely toned to jazz, with its shocks, discords, blariness, siren effects, animal and all other noises, and its heterogeneous tempos, in which every possible liberty is taken with rhythm. Those who sell candies, ices, sodas, or sweetened wind are unanimous that flappers are their best customers. It somehow seems as if they could almost live on sweets. And their mothers complain that it interferes with the normality of their appetites, digestion, and nutrition generally. A girl may have acidulous tastes and love even pickles, but this is only a counterfoil. She discriminates flavors as acutely as do wine tasters. She not only no longer chews gum as she used to do, but eschews chewers of it, and even cuts them, for on just this point I have cases. But she may munch sweetmeats at theater, school, or even on the street. Thus, the late sugar shortage was hardest on her, and how she throve so well with so short a ration of it in the good old times is a puzzling mystery. If she loves sweetmeats for their own sake, why this new love of perfumery so characteristic of her age? Is her own olfactory sense suddenly much more acute, or is she now like the flowers attracting insects, but human ones? Is there a correspondingly augmented acuity in this sense in the young man? Possibly, in thus making herself fragrant, she is not thinking of him at all. If she is, and he has no flair for it, she has made a monumental mistake. This most interesting and very important problem must be left to future investigation. At any rate, all those who sell perfumery who were interviewed agree that here too, young girls are the best customers. Girls whose dress indicates straitened resources often lavish money upon expensive perfumes, which, curiously enough nowadays, they generally prefer not pure but mixed, so that they sometimes radiate an aura of delicate odors on the street, the components of which it would puzzle an expert to identify. The German physiologist Jaeger, finding olfaction the subtlest of all our senses, wrote 2 bulky volumes to prove that the soul was really a smell, and concluded that love and aversion were based on emanations too subtle to reach consciousness, but which really mediated attraction and repugnance. If this is so, the soul of the young girl is far sweeter and more irradiant than it ever was before. She dotes on jewelry too, and her heart goes out to the rings, bracelets, bangles, beads, wristwatches, pendants, earrings that she sees in shop windows or on some friend or stranger. Her dream is of diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and gold. But imitations will go far to fill the aching void in her heart. And so in recent years, she has made a great run on this market, as those who sell them testify. The hair, which the good book calls a woman's crown of glory, of which amorists in prose and poetry have had so much to say, and which, outside the Mongolian and Negroid races, has always been one of the chief marks of distinction between the sexes, is no longer always so. The old-fashioned, demure braids once so characteristic of the budding girl are gone. Nor is the hair coiled, either high or low, at the back of the head. This medullary region, long so protected, is now exposed to wind and weather, either by puffs on either side, or still more, by the Dutch cut, which leaves the hair shortest here. Indeed, my barber tells me that he now shaves a space below the occiput for girls more frequently than when, in Italy, he used to freshen the tonsure of young priests above it. It is now more nearly immodest, I am told, to expose an ear than a knee, and special attention is given to the ear lock. It is very chic to part the hair on one side, to keep it very smooth, as if it were plastered down on top. But on all sides of the head it must be kept tousled or combed backward a la Hottentot, and the more disordered it is here, the better. In all such matters, as in so many others, the girl imitates, consciously or unconsciously, her favorite movie actresses. At least half the movie films seem to have been made for the flapper, and her tastes and style, if not her very code of honor, are fashioned on them. Librarians report that she reads much less since the movies came. No home or other authority can keep her away. The only amelioration is to have reels more befitting her stage of life. The sublime selfishness of which the flapper is so often accused, which makes her accept service and demand to be served by parents and all about her whom she can subject. Her careless irresponsibilities, which render her unconscious of all the trouble she makes, or the worries which others feel for her present and future. And the fact that she never seems to realize what it means to clean up after herself, easily alternate with the extreme desire to serve herself, and to lavish attention upon those whom she really likes. Despite her mien of independence, she is tinglingly sensitive to every breath of good and ill will. And if she has shattered old conventions, she has not gone wrong. And if she knows about many things of which she must still often pretend to be ignorant, she is thereby only the more fortified against temptation. The flapper, too, can be cruel, and often is so to other girls. She ought not to be, and it would seem does not want to be, for she knows full well from her own experience how slights and innuendos sting and burn. Perhaps she feels deep down in her soul that she is thus helping to toughen the fiber of her mates, to enable them to meet better the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune which they will encounter later in life. One of the flapper's chief traits is a passion for secrecy, and this is one reason why her teachers, parents, pastor, doctor really know so very little about her. For she has developed a modus vivendi, with each that often disarms suspicion of concealment. Her real inner life is being evolved far beyond their ken. Her very anatomy and physiological development suggest involution, and her crepuscular soul is in an ingrowing stage. With her intimates, she always has secrets, which it is treason to friendship to betray. A little younger, she invents or even pretends secrets as bonds of intimacy, or gives words an esoteric meaning, and has signs and badges which no one but her chosen few understands. So too, she may come to believe that others have secrets which they try to keep from her, particularly about vital themes, which she feels she has a right to know. Thus, if too much balked, she may listen or imagine hidden meanings which do not exist. The demure miss who sits silently at our table and in our drawing room while we talk, who goes through all the paces of schoolwork and social observances set for her, is not the real girl, and she knows it. For her true self is all the more securely masked by conforming to what we expect of her. Her imagination is in the most active stages of creative evolution, although its activities are often so submerged beneath the threshold of consciousness that she is herself not aware of its fecund spontaneity. She is all the while developing swift aperçus, full of insight and judgments about persons. And she is taking attitudes, for she is in the springtide of sentiment, and her ideality, to which the world owes so much, could not attain its goal if it were not more or less veiled. In all the long struggle for emancipation, sometimes called the war of sex against sex, woman has, and perhaps necessarily, laid aside for the time some of her most distinctive traits, and competed with man along his own lines, and has perhaps grown thereby a trifle masculine. But true progress demands that sex distinctions be pushed to the uttermost, and that women become more feminine and men more virile. This need modern feminism has failed to recognize, but it is just this which flapperdom is now asserting. These girls not only accept but glory in their sex as such, and are giving free course to its native impulses. They may be the leaders in the complete emancipation of woman from the standards man has made for her. Up to this age, our Binet-Simon tests can grade and mark, at least for intelligence, but here they balk, stammer, and diverge. The flapper's new sophistication is thus superficial. Her new self-consciousness is really naive, And in her affectations, she is simply trying out all the assortments of temperamental types, dispositions, and traits of character, as she often tries out styles of handwriting before she settles upon one. This is because hers is the most vital and most rapidly developing psyche in all the world. The evolutionary stages of flapperdom are so many, and they succeed each other so fast, and are so telescoped together, that we cannot yet determine the order of their sequence. And all my glimpses are only random snapshots of the wonderful quadrennium, the first 4 teens. She accepts the confirmation, and perhaps even the conversion, that the church prescribes, but her heart is set on this world, and not on the next. She conforms with more interest to the coming out customs of society. But these are now much belated, for in all essentials she came out unaided, and the age of her legal majority she deems too late. Once it was commonly held that those who were precocious would become blasé later. But if there ever was danger here, it exists no longer. In fact, civilization itself and all our hope that mankind may attain superhumanity depends on the prolongation, enrichment, and safeguarding of the interval between pubescence and ripe nubility. What a reversal of ancient and traditional mores it would be if the flapper, long repressed by so many taboos, were now to become the pioneer and leader of her sex to a new dispensation, and to give to the world its very best illustration of the trite but pregnant slogan, Das ewig Weibliche sieht uns hinan. She has already set fashions in attire, and even in manners, some of which her elders have copied, and have found not only sensible, but rejuvenating. Underneath the mannish ways which she sometimes affects, she really vaunts her femininity, and her exuberance gives it a new charm. The new liberties she takes with life are contagious, and make us wonder anew whether we have not all been servile to precedent, and slaves to institutions that need to be refitted to human nature, and whether the flapper may not, after all, be the bud of a new and better womanhood. The Modern Girl and Why She is Painted. Consideration of the Flapper and the Revolutionary Incorrigible Youth, by Richard Le Gallienne. Vanity Fair, January 1924. The feminization of the world is imminent. Yet the world does not appear to be growing any gentler, or to show any advance in what used to be known as the feminine virtues. Can it be that woman herself is losing them, and that her apparent victory over the world is really a victory for the male? In short, is she becoming more of a man or less of a woman? No, not less of a woman, I think. She is too shrewd for that. But more of a man, perhaps. That is, she is aiming to combine, in herself, the dominating qualities of both sexes. And to tell the truth, she seems, as the phrase is, to be getting away with it. No one can fail to observe that her very efficient invasion of the sphere of those activities which used to be regarded as exclusively masculine has coincided with a marked accentuation of herself in her own peculiar sphere of influence. The old-fashioned woman, reformed, began by scorning the lures and vanities of her sex, wore horrible trousers, and generally affected an unbecoming mannishness of dress and demeanor. Her modern sister makes no such mistake. On the contrary, never in history has woman so unblushingly capitalized the fascinations of her sex, nor made it more seductively clear to all the world that male and female created he, them. While the modern woman drives a hard bargain with you in real estate, her deed box and her vanity box are side by side. And I have little doubt that Lady Astor powders her nose with equanimity in the House of Commons, as she faces the boorish insults of Labourite MPs. Woman indeed still keeps in her hands the immemorial cards of her own sex, and wants, and gets, the high cards of man as well. Nothing will satisfy her but all the picture cards. It may be that she is thus evolving toward a more complete human being than either man or woman has ever been before. A new sex? Who knows? Meanwhile, let there be no mistake. Whether she sits on juries, attends prize fights, or fights in a battalion of death, she remains no less a woman than ever. Perhaps, indeed, her masculine disguises make her womanhood the more apparent. I don't mean merely that she remains the same good wife and mother. Nothing so prosaic, though she may be that too. But I mean that whatever other role she assumes, there is one traditional role she has not the smallest intention of foregoing. That of Circe, the eternal enchantress. She is never tired of letting you know that she is of the same sex as her famous sister, Cleopatra. It is one of the many paradoxes of our paradoxical era that woman's new seriousness of purpose should be accompanied by so widespread an outburst of feminine vanity and luxury. The time is out of joint, say the philosophers. But the trouble with philosophers is that there has never been a time which they didn't find out of joint. There has never been a period in history when, according to them, the world was not going to the dogs. And according to them, the blame has always been with the young people of the time. The revolutionary, incorrigible young. Just now, it is the young women in particular who are under fire. The young men are not much better, but it is the young women of the day that are especially scandalizing the moralists. Their independence, their impatience of restraint, their pagan pursuit of pleasure, their craving for excitement, their absorption in their looks and their clothes, their determination to be beautiful, and let who will be humdrum. These characteristics of the modern girl from 15 to 50 are causing much disquietude, much shaking of serious heads. Recently, the suffragist was the awful feminine example. But the suffragist's work is done, and she has been succeeded by the flapper. Flapperism in all its forms is the menace of the hour. Perfectly awful stories are current about the flapper, and it is only a brave soul here and there who has a good word to say for her. The actual facts about her cannot properly be known to persons of philosophic age. Probably the young man with whom she orgies and drinks deep, so it is said, are the only reliable authorities on her psychology, and these young men are not interested in her psychology at all. As says a dramatist of Charles II's time, another great age of flapperdom, women, the rogues, have got an ill habit of preferring beauty, no matter where they find it. It is not a new pursuit, this curiosity and the desire of beauty. And who is going to blame them? After all, man's great concern with woman is her beauty, and that being so, it is only natural that her beauty should be woman's great concern also. The young man of the period must be the best judge of the young woman of the period. If she seems good, that is, beautiful in his eyes, what has anyone else to say about it? Whatever older heads have to advance by way of criticism must be shared by the young of both sexes. For now, as always, they valiantly aid and abet each other. But, as a matter of fact, it will not do, it is not fair, to blame the young for the flapperism of the times. These young sons and daughters of joy are but reaping the harvest, the whirlwind if you like, sown by their immediate elders of 20 and 30 years ago. They are the children of that materialistic science, that gospel of pleasure and artifice, that philosophy of go as you please and gather ye roses while you may, which began their instructive and destructive work towards the end of the last century, finding in Verlaine, Oscar Wilde, Aubrey Beardsley, and Bernard Shaw their seductively brilliant and amusing exponents. The foundations of Victorian morality, or at least propriety, had been already sapped by grave biologists and one grim philosopher, Nietzsche, who, for the time at least, had seemed to rob religion and conventional ethics of their authority. Though, as we are already coming to see, they were only superficially destructive, and were but clearing the ground for that deeper and sincerer expression of man's spiritual instincts, which, beneath all our temporary cynicism and disillusion, is already underway. Meanwhile, we are in the thick of a carnival of the released human instincts, disporting themselves in unrestrained protest against the hypocrisy and humdrum of Victorian conventions. Maybe the pendulum is swinging far, but a new equilibrium is in sight. And meanwhile, though we may regret certain phenomena of the change, the transition presents no cause for serious disquiet, and the phenomena are at least picturesque and full of dramatic significance. Perhaps, for the moment, no one has any fixed belief in anything in particular, except that life is short, and that, as the phrase is, we only live once. Therefore, the young seem bent in squeezing as much out of their short lives as possible, getting rich quick, speeding up their sensations, dancing, feasting, dressing, exploiting themselves and their opportunities to the selfish limit, and generally jazzing their brief space of existence. It cannot and will not last. But there is nothing unnatural about it, given all the circumstances, among which, I suppose, must be counted that great war, without which no moral argument is now complete, though that war itself was rather an effect than a cause. In this universal carnival, woman is naturally a leading figure, for she is at once the source and symbol of pleasure, with a capital P. Unless she joins the dance, there is no dance. Besides, during the Victorian era, she served an unusually long bondage to the domestic virtues. Shall we blame her if, seeing her opportunity, she takes her fling for a while and gives rein to the decorative and histrionic impulses of her nature? She is but applying the lessons of those 1890 poets and artists who emphasized beauty as the whole duty of woman. There are only two kinds of women, the plain and the colored, said Oscar Wilde in A Woman of No Importance. And the modern woman took that and other such worldly wisdom from the same source so eagerly to heart that, were he alive, Wilde would have delightedly to amend his epigram and say that nowadays there is only one kind of woman, the colored. For who will deny that the plain woman has completely and mysteriously disappeared? Yes, the world was never so full of beautiful women as it is now. At all events, woman has succeeded in making us think so. And there is no question that the average of feminine beauty is startlingly high. The reason, aside from the part that athletics and hygienic clothing have played in her recent physical development, is that never before have so many women at once set their minds on being beautiful. And this beauty is largely a creation of literature. It bears out the truth of another of Wilde's creative epigrams. Nature imitates art, more than art imitates nature. For the last 20 or 30 years, writers and artists generally have waged a campaign of what one might call romantic artifice applied to life. Woman has been encouraged in every direction to cultivate her beauty and to dramatize herself, to emphasize her strangeness and heighten her natural sorcery. The influence of Aubrey Beardsley alone has been incalculable, and the teachings of such artists and writers have been taken up by an army of imaginative modistes, professional creators of fashions, practitioners of all the various arts concerned with the beauty of woman, manufacturers of all delicate feminine commodities employed in such arts, and all these have been exploited by a vast system of skillful creative advertising which has become an art in itself. Catering upon a regal scale to feminine vanity has proven a lucrative and pleasant occupation. The world of business has seen the immense profit to be made by appealing to the vanity of woman, and has deliberately capitalized it. Arts of the toilet, therefore, that had previously been employed only by great ladies, ladies of the theatrical profession, and professional beauties generally, have now been placed within the reach of every girl who can read the popular magazines, or even the illustrated newspapers. There is not a woman now left in America who is not a professional beauty, or encouraged so to regard herself. Thus, the powder puff and the lipstick are as common, perhaps even commoner, than toothbrushes. Beauty has become democratized, and pulchritude for the proletariat is the latest extension of liberty, equality, and fraternity. As a result, our streets, our offices and shops, even our factories, are peopled with pocket Cleopatras. Miniature Mona Lisas and half-portion Helens of Troy are a drug on the market. Every city, even every village, has become a theatrical production in which all the women we meet are leading ladies. The world behind the scenes, once so mysterious, is no longer a mystery at all. For every block is a dressing room, with beauties making up at every step. The whole earth has gone on masquerade. Every little feminine creature we meet is absorbed in a dream of herself. For the moment, she may be a stenographer or a saleslady, but in her heart, she is a beautiful and romantic being on the lookout for a luxurious destiny, a princess in disguise who but hides her light. The moralist may shake his head, but for the more human observer of these little figures, these really surprisingly successful imitation beauties, these myriad doll-like copies of illustrious originals, are not without pathos, and the heart must be hard that begrudges them their poor little dream. After all, they but express the eternal human need of romance. The gospel of work is all very well, but man lives not by work alone, any more than by bread. We all need a little spiced cake in our lives. And no one who honestly faces the truth about modern work, the kind of work these millions of girls are driven to do, can set it up as an interest in which they can, or ought, to find the joyous satisfaction so volubly preached by those who haven't it to do. What wonder that they set their hopes on some silly movie paradise, spend their money on clinging clothes, and are feverish for such dancing and such jazz as is within their reach. What wonder if they long to be beautiful, if they take refuge in some sort of dream life, centering in their own looks and tempting charms. What wonder if they see themselves as Cleopatras in miniature, whom an Anthony will seek. But beauty is, in a way, only an aristocratic expression of nature. It must be born of long and fine processes, and it is to be feared that the present democratic imitation, clever though it be, is, when we look more closely into it, only a depressing vulgarization. The proverb has it that beauty is only skin deep, but that is only partially true. Complexions are not everything, nor those pathetically amusing mimicries of strangeness and high-bred hauteur which our standardized beauties affect. The arts of the surface cannot do all. Beauty cannot be entirely applied from the outside, but must well up into the face from the inside. And in this interior soul of beauty, the modern girl, with all her lipsticks, powder puffs, vanity boxes, adhesive eyelashes, etc., is sadly lacking. Her very preoccupation with her beauty has defeated its own ends. It has produced a race of hard-eyed egoists, in whom vanity seems to have swallowed up all other feelings. Such beauty is too often a rose without perfume, and we feel that these vivid creations of the beauty parlor are not really women after all, but automatons, skillfully constructed and decorated to represent real women. They remind one of those water nymphs, Lorelei or Nice, who were very seductive at a first glance, but who, on closer scrutiny, were seen to be hollow in their backs, mere masks, mere painted husks of women, creatures without hearts and souls. Indeed, it is impossible not to feel that such beauty as the modern woman has thus arduously achieved has been at the expense of her humanity, at the expense of those qualities and graces which are inseparable from the ideal she fondly conceives herself as attaining the ideal of, the lady. An imitation beauty, an imitation lady, and an imitation courtesan. Though that may be a hard saying, it is to be feared that it broadly generalizes what one might call the feminine mob of the moment, that histrionic multitude of women who crowd most glaringly to the front of the modern picture. They do not, of course, constitute the whole of modern women, but they are the women that first catch the eye, swarming like moths into the limelight. And these, I am inclined to think, are not all that they are painted. If the observer misunderstands them, it is they themselves that invite misunderstanding. That curious cult of the courtesan, for instance. The cult, I mean, of her superficial lure, her ways of dress and adornment, and of emphasizing her sexual appeal, which again is a reflex of the widespread cult of the courtesan in modern literature. I do not believe that it is more than a pose. Indeed, what we call emancipation is undoubtedly bringing about a more stimulating camaraderie between women and men than has existed before. Her meeting men on an equal footing in the business of life has perhaps necessitated a strengthening of her natural safeguards, and entailed on men a more genuine chivalry. It may serve to bring out many admirable qualities in the modern woman, to give her a new self-reliance, and qualify her to be a more suitable all-around companion to her masculine partner in the adventure of living. Society seems to be going through a process of reconstruction, and the process, as it has always been, is disquieting. But the modern woman and man alike may eventually come out of it, none the worse for having kicked over the traces and jazzed around the maypole with unbecoming and ostentatious levity. What Became of the Flappers? By Zelda Sayer Fitzgerald. McCall's Magazine, October 1925. Flapper wasn't a particularly fortunate cognomen. It is far too reminiscent of open galoshes and covered-up ears and all other proverbial flapper paraphernalia, which might have passed unnoticed save for the name. All these things are, or were, amusing externals of a large class of females who in no way deserve the distinction of being called flappers. The flappers that I am writing this article about are a very different and intriguing lot of young people, who are perhaps unstable, but who are giving us the first evidence of youth asserting itself out of the cradle. They are not originating new ideas, or new customs, or new moral standards. They are simply endowing the old ones that we are used to with a vitality that we are not used to. We are not accustomed to having our daughters think our ideas for themselves, and it is distasteful to some of us that we are no longer able to fit the younger generation into our conceptions of what the younger generation was going to be like when we watched it in the nursery. I do not think that anything my daughter could possibly do 18 years from now would surprise me. And yet, I will probably be forbidding her in frigid tones to fly more than 3,000 miles high, or more than 500 miles an hour with little Willie Jones, and bidding her never to go near that horrible Mars. I can imagine these things now, but if they should happen 20 years from now, I would certainly wonder what particular dog my child was going to. The flapper springs full-grown, like Minerva, from the head of her once déclassé father, Jazz, upon whom she lavishes affection and reverence and deepest filial regard. She is not a condition arisen from war unrest, as I have so often read in the shower of recent praise and protest which she has evoked, and to which I am contributing. She is a direct result of the greater appreciation of beauty, youth, gaiety, and grace which is sweeping along in a carmagnole. I saw one in a movie once, and I use this word advisedly, with our young anti-Puritans at the head. They have placed such a premium on the flapper creed to give and get amusement that even the dumbbells become dulcies and convert stupidity into charm. Dulcie is infinitely preferable to the kind of girl who, 10 years ago, quoted the Rubaiyat at you and told you how misunderstood she was, or the kind who straightened your tie as evidence that in her lay the spirit of your eternal mother, or the kind who spent long summer evenings telling you that it wasn't the number of cigarettes you smoked that she minded, but just the principle, to show off her nobility of character. These are some of the bores of yesterday. Now even bores must be original, so the more unfortunate members of the flapper sect have each culled an individual line from their daily rounds, which amuses or not according to whether you have seen the same plays, heard the same tunes, or read reviews of the same books. The best flapper is reticent emotionally and courageous morally. You always know what she thinks, but she does all her feeling alone. These are two characteristics which will bring social intercourse to a more charming and more sophisticated level. I believe in the flapper as an involuntary and invaluable cupbearer to the arts. I believe in the flapper as an artist in her particular field, the art of being young, being lovely, being an object. For almost the first time, we are developing a class of pretty yet respectable young women, whose sole functions are to amuse and to make growing old a more enjoyable process for some men and staying young an easier one for others. Even parents have ceased to look upon their children as permanent institutions. The fashionable mother no longer keeps her children young so that she will preserve the appearance of a debutante. She helps them to mature so that she will be mistaken for a stepmother. Once her girls are old enough to be out of finishing school, a period of freedom and social activity sets in for her. The daughters are rushed home to make a chaotic debut and embark upon a feverish chase for a husband. It is no longer permissible to be single at 25. The flapper makes haste to marry, lest she be a leftover and be forced to annex herself to the crowd just younger. She hasn't time to ascertain the degree of compatibility between herself and her fiancé before the wedding, so she ascertains that they will be separated if the compatibility should be mutually rated 0 after it. The flapper. She is growing old. She forgets her flapper creed and is conscious only of her flapper self. She is married mid loud acclamation on the part of relatives and friends. She has come to none of the predicted bad ends, but has gone at last where all good flappers go, into the young married set, into boredom and gathering conventions and the pleasure of having children, having lent a while a splendor and courageousness and brightness to life, as all good flappers should. Flappers and the Movies by Colleen Moore. The Truth About the Movies by the Stars, 1924. All movie fans among the ladies are not flappers, but all flappers are movie fans. Some of our greatest directors and stars may trace their success to the fact that they have the following of the vast army of American flappers. In characterizing the flapper on the screen, I have always endeavored to show that underneath the ultra-modern veneer of the flapper, there beats a heart as stout, as sympathetic, and as human as in the bosom of the quaint old-fashioned maid of our grandmother's time. Many motion picture players and directors think that the flapper is the most appreciative of all classes of screen audiences. It is contended that she is more keenly sympathetic, more in tune with the emotions of the players, and alive to the causes of these emotions than any other type of movie follower. The fact that the flapper is a movie fan is entirely natural. Motion pictures are the popular thing. Flappers patronize the popular thing. If motion pictures were out of date, the flapper would have nothing to do with them. Just as the matinee idol of the old-fashioned melodramatic stock companies were the rage among girls of former days, so our modern movie heroes are the rage among flappers today. There is nothing unhealthy or off-color in the flapper's attitude toward the movies. The color, the fire of youth, the natural beauties, and the romance of the movies give the flapper the entertainment that appeals to her age. Our grandmothers, when they were girls, would have thrilled at motion pictures in their day had they had them, just as the flappers enjoy them today. The following of the modern girl, and the modern girl happens to be the flapper, is a great goal of any enterprise. The loyalty of the flapper is something a motion picture player or director can well be proud of. I can name a dozen players whose popularity is entirely confined to the approval of flapperdom. Dr. G. Stanley Hall studied the flapper's personality. The New York Times, May 4th, 1924. The death of Dr. G. Stanley Hall, former president of Clark University, scientist and psychologist, recalls his remarks on the modern young girl made some years ago. These remarks were misquoted, and he was made to say things either too strongly in favor of flappers or too much against them. So far afield did some versions of his views go that he once said he felt obliged to laugh at the stories he read about himself to avoid getting angry. What he did say was that the young girl's vagaries are due to the call of the primitive, and that she is the most intricate and baffling problem perhaps that science has faced. He thus sketched the young lady of today. Among insects, birds, and animals, it is the male that puts on beautiful array when the love season dawns. But with humans, it is the female. This is the season of bangs, curls, puffs, pompadours, frills, ribbons, possibly rouges and powders, high heels, flaunting hats, sunshades, ornamental purses, bangles, and very long gloves. Plain soups, vegetables, and fish irk her, and she presses on to dessert as to the last illuminating chapter of a dull novel. But it is at this period that her duality of self begins to develop a sort of inner shrine soul that contains some of the most primitive instincts of her sex, while the other self is a more social, superficial one, which is occupied with the interests of her daily life. The two lives may be entire strangers to each other, although the upper self is more likely never to suspect the existence of the lower. The lower, for instance, often falls in love long before the upper has any inkling of it, and when it does find out, a crisis arises. Thus, woman, who was once thought soulless, now comes nearer to having two souls than does man. A somewhat duller phase of flapper psychology was touched on by Dr. Hall in speaking of the avoidance by young girls of specialization in study, which comes natural to a boy. They have a different view of things, he said. The girl, as she goes along the street, sees what is in the store windows. She looks around naturally and notes what she sees, while the boy is likely to be interested in some one thing remoter from his experience. As he develops, this feeling is intensified. He wants to know all about some one thing. He gets right down to that because he has a feeling that he wants to be master of something. Says flapper isn't so bad as painted. The New York Times, May 4th, 1924. College flappers are not so bad as they are painted, according to Mary E. Woolley, president of Mount Holyoke College, who defended them against recent charges at the annual luncheon of the college at the Hotel Pennsylvania yesterday. Speaking on college assets and liabilities, President Woolley said in part, "There's been too much emphasis on the college flapper of late. They have been pictures, in some quarters, as painted, jazzed-up, smoking, bob-haired scofflaws. My experience is that college doesn't appeal to young girls of that type. And even if some members of this class, which exists to a large extent in the imagination of certain people who are always ready to decry the womanhood of America, do come to college, they soon find that college is no place for them. Generally, they are obliged to settle down and work hard in order to keep up with the standards of the institution to which they belong." President Woolley made the further point that the young women of America in the last generation have not been taught to go to church as their mothers and grandmothers. She does not believe, however, that this is the fault of the girls. "It is the duty," she went on, "of educational institutions to show young girls that Christianity really means something. In this matter, the college authorities are on the defensive. We must interpret to youth the meaning of religion in the light of present-day needs." The speaker would not say that young women today are less moral than 20 years ago. "I hold," she said, "that the women of this generation have asserted themselves intellectually, and therefore are more independent. Independence, however, is not a fault, though I would say it was a liability which needed careful watching." On the asset side of the college balance, President Woolley puts the increasing popularity of colleges, saying that the average increase in attendance has almost doubled in the last 25 years. On the debit side, she places the fact that there is too much tendency on the part of students to feel the drift of the outside social world. Against that item, however, she has placed the fact that young girls today are assuming the responsibilities of the sense of a community and have acquired greater poise. Magistrate bars flapper from court's vocabulary. The New York Times, December 29th, 1923. The term flapper must not be used in the traffic court, Magistrate House ruled yesterday when a lawyer explained that his client, Miss Catherine Platt, 107 East 39th Street, accused of driving a car without a license, was too ill to appear. The lawyer told the court that Miss Platt was not a flapper, as the description of her given by motorcycle policeman Bigley might indicate. "What is a flapper? I confess my ignorance," asked the magistrate. "I mean, the young lady is not frivolous," said the lawyer. "Oh, I see. That is different," commented the magistrate. "The term flapper is not to be used in this court. See that the young lady is here on January 2nd, or a bench warrant will be issued for her." Flappers are not all alike. The New York Times, December 29th, 1923. Dr. Abraham A. Roback, a Harvard psychologist, has been applying intelligence tests to flappers, and has come to the conclusion that they are a particularly stupid lot, with practically none of the qualities that are desirable in human beings, and a hopeless problem for educators. That is a hard saying, so hard that one cannot help wondering just what girls the doctor includes in this class, and how he knows when he sees one of them. Does bobbed hair, habitual resort to the expedient once reserved for the faces of Jezebel's daughters, and a more or less pronounced disregard for ancient conventions in feminine conduct constitute flapperism? If so, the Harvard man has been unfortunate in his selection of specimens. There are others showing these same signs who really do not lack brains, however much they may try the patience of elderly observers. And on the other hand, the statist of behavior is no conclusive proof that she who shows it is an intellectual giantess. Perhaps the flapper is a phenomenon recurring in every age, taking much joy in making her critics sit up, but avoiding destruction with the average frequency of the human species. Flapper robs in jail. The New York Times, May 18th, 1924. Los Angeles, California, May 17th. Pearl Redmond, flapper bandit, convicted of holding up and robbing a real estate man, was sentenced today to serve from 5 years to life in San Quentin prison, but not before she had added an alleged $15,000 pearl necklace robbery to her criminal record, according to sheriff's deputies. Mrs. A.E. Rickenbacker, also known as Mrs. Marie Tomlin, formerly prominent in Pasadena society, who spent last night in the county jail, complained she had lost the necklace when she was arraigned on a charge of defrauding a hotel. She was ordered held pending trial May 22nd, and jail attendants made a thorough but futile search of the quarters she had occupied. Then Mrs. Gladys Ellers, sister of the flapper bandit, who had visited the jail with her little girl, telephoned the jailer to ask what disposal to make of a string of pearls the little girl had brought home with her. They were a gift of the flapper bandit, the girl explained. Studies flapper Slouch. Chicago businessman starts laboratory to find what is wrong. The New York Times, July 6th, 1922. Colonel George Fabian, member of the firm of Bliss, Fabian and Company of New York and Chicago, has inaugurated a crusade against the flapper Slouch. For that purpose, he has constructed a unique laboratory on his country estate on the Fox River near Geneva, Illinois, where he is trying to find out what is wrong with the human body, especially with the female figure, which he believes should be the apotheosis of grace. He has added to his colony of thinkers and original research workers a young woman from New York, Miss Mary Tood, an exponent of physical culture. From the study and application of her methods, he hopes to give to the world a warning of the evil effects of flapper walks and slouches, and evolve a cure for such incorrect postures. In his laboratory, he has collected a sort of chamber of horrors, examples of what flappers will grow into if they persist in throwing their shoulders forward and to try to imitate a question mark. Mother stood watch while daughter stole. Had no money to gratify girl's craze to be a flapper, her excuse. The New York Times, November 16th, 1922. Philadelphia, November 15th. Confession made to Judge Stern this morning by a mother who admitted watching for her daughter while the latter stole fine clothes so that she could be a flapper amazed both the judge and spectators in the room. The mother, Mrs. Anna Massim, wept as she told her story. With her daughter Ida, 23 years old, she is charged with the theft of clothing valued at $150 from a Market Street department store. I had no money to buy clothes my daughter wanted, she said. Ida got the craze to be a flapper, and to get her the necessary clothing, we decided to steal. I was afraid she would adopt a worse method of getting her finery, so intent was she upon being able to dress as well as other girls in the neighborhood. We went to the department store and I stood watch while she took the things she wanted. Mrs. Massim, who is a motherly-looking woman, 47 years old, came to Philadelphia with her daughter a year ago from Allentown. When the mother and daughter were caught by store detectives, a search of their home revealed dresses, waists, silk hose, expensive lingerie, and umbrellas that had been taken from various shops. You don't mean to say that you, a mother, went to a store with your daughter knowing she was going to steal articles of clothing? Judge Stern exclaimed. Yes, the woman admitted as her head dropped. I had no money with which to buy Ida the clothes she demanded, and I knew of no other way of getting them. Judge Stern held the case in abeyance for a few days pending investigation. Flappers resent move for regulation dress. The New York Times, August 25th, 1923. Somerset, Pennsylvania, August 24th. This little city of Somerset has been somersaulted into a style class war, with the bobbed hair lipstick flappers arrayed on one side and their sisters of long tresses and silkless stockings on the other. The first clash occurred yesterday when the Parent Teachers Association formally endorsed the old-fashioned girl and took steps to petition the school board to adopt a uniform style of dress for all schoolgirls. The rules would bar silk stockings, short skirts, bobbed hair, and low-neck sleeveless dresses. But the flapper contingent, hearing of the meeting, stormed it. Their verbal protest, delivered in rhyme, was short and snappy. I can show my shoulders, I can show my knees, I'm a free-born American, and can show what I please. With that, the flappers walked out while the parent-teacher session was turned into an indignation meeting. Action on the dress question will be demanded of the school board, the parents and teachers decided. Would-be flapper commits suicide. 14-year-old Chicago girl inhales gas when mother bars styles of classmates. The New York Times, June 4th, 1923. Other girls in her class rolled their stockings, had their hair bobbed, and called themselves flappers. She wanted to be a flapper too. But her mother was an old-fashioned mother, who kindly but firmly said no. So the girl put a rubber hose in her mouth and turned on the gas. This is declared to be the story behind the suicide of Ruth Hornbaker, a 14-year-old high school girl of Berwyn. She died today in the home of her father, Albert R. Hornbaker, of 3131 South Oak Park Avenue, following 2 days in a comatose condition. Her parents had found her unconscious Friday night on her bed. Now it is a flapper doll. The New York Times, May 16, 1922. One of the latest novelties of a gift nature is the flapper doll. Done in natural colors, the doll represents the typical flapper from the crown of her head to the flopping galoshes which adorn her feet. The figure stands about 6 inches high. The detail work of the clothing is well worked out, and the facial features are clear. In view of the present flapper tendencies among girls and young women, it is expected that a considerable demand for the doll will be met with. It is principally designed to be an ornament for the flapper's room. Flappers Merely Humans. The New York Times, March 17, 1922. There is nothing mysterious about the flapper. She is just a female who has lived down thousands of years of hypocrisy and now has become what she most desired to be for ages, a human being. Dr. Lee A. Stone, head of the Chicago Department of Health, said today in an address before a health conference. Flapperism, or modern feminism, is just the revolt of youth, added Dr. Stone. It is the resumption of the original status of mankind,